Hello, and welcome back to My Time with Lynn, episode 3. Special guest Richard Borkowski, an old friend of mine, someone that I haven't seen in person. I think we were talking since 2009, but we've been friends over the years. And sort of a unique perspective because he was a supporter of the LaRouche organization, not an internal member, but someone that was around our group for many, many years and just had his own observations, of which we hope to discuss some of those today. A little bit of a background though. For a while, when I worked, and we met in the Seattle office. When I was working with the Seattle office, that's where we first met. We had this thing, the older baby boomer generation of our organization were the primary fundraisers, and there was a high degree of like anxiety and trepidation with some of the financial support from our financial supporters. The baby boomer organizers would raise funds or secure pledges of donations from some of our members, and instead of the supporters would offer to send in donations via check. We didn't have a lot of online options back in the day, but our boomer organizers were anxious and they would often have our youth members go and pick up physical checks because they felt that was a more secure way to get those donations. And that's
I
kind of how
forgot about that.
that's right. That's how we
I did
initially
write many. I forgot about that. I wrote many checks.
that's right. And we that's initially how we met. But kind of a funny story about that because in any given field office, and I was in the Seattle office, we would rotate these different collateral duties. And one of them was like to be our finance point person. So I, at a certain point, was asked to do that. And wasn't my favorite thing in the world, but I was a team player. I'm like, sure, I'll do it. Uh, for a while, this is a time, I mean, kind of throughout my whole experience with the organization, finances were tight, but I was coming into the finance role when finances were exceptionally tight relative to our past. And at our Seattle office, we didn't pay the bills on time for our trash service at our office. So we did not, yeah, it's crazy. And so we did not have trash for I think like 10 or 12 months for an
Oh
office.
wow!
It was an office of like 30 people. And so, we had to get creative with what we do with that trash. Sorry to say, but it's kind of, reminds you of Alice's restaurant, I guess. But it's the first day I'm on finance when I'm talking to our upper echelon financial people. I was like, hey, okay, yeah, you need me to go to the bank for this and that, whatever. Like, but hey, can we pay our trash bill? And they say, what do you mean pay your trash bill? I'm like, we haven't had trash for like a year. They said, what? And like they were not tracking. They were unaware. If they had been told before, I'm sure, but there's just so many things going on they forgot. But a certain level of like the cynicism with the other finance people that I worked with to not even bring it up. It's like it's not going to get solved. Just don't even try. Like just make do is a sacrifice we want to make to work on the mission to accomplish our larger organizational goals. So anyway, back to the other point. I was doing pickups one day for finance, and there's all this pressure. There's all kinds of moral pressure coming down at you as a member of this organization, right? As you can imagine, right? Because I think you saw some of it. And part of it, I was running the office with this other gentleman, and we ran things pretty decently. We had a good working relationship, but we weren't like the best friends individually. We were very different temperaments, and he was putting a lot of pressure on me, that I was like spending too much time on finance, and I need to get back out in the field. I'm like, okay, sure, like I knew that I was doing what I could, but just there's that like moral guilt pressure coming down on you. So one time I had to do some pickups, and it was kind of down south, and we were organizing the Puyallup Fair, which was kind of an interesting opportunity. You might know this, but the fairgrounds were built on the old internment camps from World War II, the Puyallup Fairgrounds.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was the biggest one. It was the biggest individual camp.
Oh, I had never heard that before.
Yeah, kind of wild. It tinges the view of that fair a little bit. Um,
Sure.
but it's just part of the history, right? I think Bainbridge Downs was the first place that they were picked up, the Japanese, like
Okay.
first place in the country. Anyway, so I go and it's late. Like the team have been set up for a while, and I'm pulling in late. I have to park super far because it's fair parking. So I'm parking like, a mile away or something. It's dark out. And because of my like the pressure in my head, this like guilt to go join this team, I'm like sprinting. And it's like, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night or something, pretty dark out. It's September in the Northwest, right? So it's pretty dark. Sprinting, and I my foot catches some little ridge in the sidewalk and I trip. And I'm like sprinting, or I'm like running
Right.
pretty quick. And so I fall, my arms break it, like I messed up my wrist, it's still messed up, and like big chunks of my skin came off on my elbows and my knees. It
Oh
was it
wow.
was pretty bad. And so I go find an aid station and they just have like little band-aids. So I have
Yeah.
like 20
Right.
band-aids on each arm.
I can imagine. Right.
And like I couldn't do anything organized. Like I had to just basically go right back home to get cleaned up because I'm just bleeding.
Right.
And then I got home and like the only soap we had, because I had to like disinfect it because there's like rocks and stuff in there. And the only soap we had was like some exfoliant soap with all kinds of like herbs and stuff in it. So it's all great. So it's like sandpaper. And I'm having to like grate out my skin. Kind of gross, but it's just like it's a vivid memory because and then the next day I'm on one of our other collateral duties, which is like to take care of the to prepare the food for everybody, which was a bad idea for me still bleeding to do that. But it's like whatever, you do it because the mission requires it. Right. So just a silly kind of a side note. But our first meeting was some of those financial pickups for our financial team. And I remember, did you ever see that movie 4 Minute Mile? It was a small movie. It was well, Richard Jenkins, I think, and I think Kim Bassiner's in it. I saw it, it was like 2010s, but one of the scenes was filmed at that old warehouse you worked at. The back door, the stairs leading up to the second story, and I think your mic might be off. You might be muted. There you go.
You're right. I did mute myself.
There
Sorry.
you go. You're good. So yeah, it was I saw that. I was like, I know that staircase. I used to walk up that staircase like once a month to pick up
Really,
to pick up
the same
checks.
building, huh?
The same building, yeah. It was that rickety staircase that like did not feel safe at all. It like was it
Well, that staircase has a little bit of a story behind it
really?
because yeah, when I first started working there, it really didn't they didn't really use it very much. And then when I started working there, that was kind of my office in the back there, and I'd use that a lot more. And we'd
Mhm.
go up and down. And then eventually, one of the owners had this idea of sort of letting the graffiti artists sort of come out, and I wanted to sort of commission this beautiful mural for the whole building because it runs right along the Amtrak corridor there.
Yeah, yeah,
He didn't want to do that. He just wanted to sort of he had one person in particular that wanted to paint there, and then he was a younger guy, and he kind of turned it loose on the internet, which I knew would happen. And I was like, "Don't do this. You're
yeah.
going to regret turning this loose to the internet people."
Right.
And it just became such a mess. And then it was just there was just paint everywhere. So there was like on the off hours, the graffiti artists were everywhere. And eventually, I can't remember. Somehow that staircase got partially detached,
Yep. Mhm.
and it was
Yeah.
kind of hanging
It was
part of the
rickety. Yeah,
way.
yeah. That's what I
That's
remember.
why it was rickety,
That's funny.
but they used to be very solid and perfectly fine.
That's funny. Yeah, I remember the
Yeah,
rickety. Every time I was like, am I going to survive this?
yeah, that
But
was
yeah,
why.
yeah, but that's yeah. So it's called 4 Minute Mile, and I was just watching. I was like, that's the staircase to Richard's office. It's a
I'm gonna
funny.
have to watch that movie.
It was on some streaming. I forget. It's not bad. It's
Right.
it's decent. It's interesting just for the Seattle stuff.
Sure.
But that was yeah, and it was cool because we had a lot of supporters. Right, any field office is going to just run to a lot of people in the local area, and some of them might just do one contribution. That's kind of it. We're going to turn over their contact information to our phone teams, and the idea of it was like we develop people, like teach them about more of our deeper philosophy, deeper policies, etc., and like ideally recruit them to our organizational goals, right? And some people stick around for a while, and you get to know them a little bit better. And that was kind of the case with you and I. So I remember one of our first discussions was about me and a couple other youth had just intervened in some Democratic Party. I think the head of the Washington State Democratic Party, and you and I were just talking about politics, and it came up, and I told this intervention. You thought it was funny, like I think we just were like making fun of the guy because he was so inept. Like we were just to his face.
Right. Right.
Because
Right.
I
Right.
mean, one positive is like we just didn't care what people thought, so we just tell them what we thought, and it's like whatever, take it or leave it. But we think you're running this party in a really crappy way, and deal with that. You should let us in and help you out or whatever. So so anyway, I didn't properly welcome you. Welcome, Richard. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And
Oh,
at some point, um, ooh, maybe we can talk about at some point bullet points. Well, the monorail I want to talk about, and then
okay.
even a funny connection with the Franklin cover-up, which we talked about before. Since you
Oh
grew
my
up,
God,
well, no, so just since you grew up in, you said you went to some of those places.
Iowa.
Yeah, yeah, and
I have a book on that.
yeah, yeah, I know. I know the author. Well, I used to know the author.
Nor- Noreen?
No, I shouldn't
Oh
say.
no, I'm sorry. Noreen is Johnny Goss's mother.
Right.
I actually met her.
Okay. Wow. No, the other one
Yeah.
written is like ghost written by that state senator.
Oh,
I won't say her name, but I forget his name. But I knew the person who actually wrote the who did the research and who was in our
oh,
organization. She was in our organization and did the work on that, and then
okay.
ghost wrote it for that senator. But anyway, so if you wouldn't mind telling our audience how you came across this wild organization and kind of how you developed into your support, and we'll just take it from there.
Wow. I think I barely remember. I don't know. You probably remember better than me. I think I started getting involved with LaRouche during the Bush impeachment days.
Yeah, Cheney. Yeah,
I think that's how I initially got started.
that's probably yeah. I think that makes sense.
And I can't remember,
We had a big
maybe it
tribe
was the
too.
person before you, I think I had worked with, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't remember either. I don't remember who
Yeah.
you met. Yeah, early on for our audience, really from like 2003, after the Valerie Plame uh,
Oh,
ouster, right? After Scooter Libby and Cheney outed a undercover CIA agent, Valerie Plame.
right.
Uh, they covered that Sean Penn movie. I forget what it's called, where he plays Joe Wilson, and
Mhm.
I think Naomi Watts plays Valerie Plame. But they show the basic story elements of that. After that, we started calling for Cheney's impeachment. That was from 2003 to like 2008. Our point was that Bush was not really at the controls. He wasn't really making the decisions for that administration. It was much more Dick Cheney running the
Yeah,
neoconservative
I was,
policy.
yeah, I always said they kind of put Bush out to pasture, and Cheney was the evil genius.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So it was, yeah, that makes sense that we met you that way. And then you read our stuff, you would take the phone calls, you would donate, you came to some meetings, and what were your first impressions of our group and how did they maybe evolve?
Well, like I would say, my main contact was probably talking with you, and we had some like nice extended conversations. But you guys gave out tons of literature,
Sure. Yeah.
and I didn't read all of that, but I'd read a lot of that stuff, and it was very interesting. I just liked how detailed and policy driven it was. I was, I think the thing with LaRouche was I was just so I was becoming really obsessed with the whole impeachment thing. I really thought
Sure.
it was such a necessary thing,
Mhm.
and when it didn't happen, I was really kind of really what's the word you know devastated or very what's the word
Despondent.
not quite despondent, but just so disappointed
Sure.
because it
Yeah.
just seemed so obvious that something had to be done. And then it was
Sure.
just sort of like I think when I don't know if it was Nancy Pelosi or Barack Obama or both of them that basically were like, "Oh, it's time to move on."
Right.
Let's.
Yeah. Sure. They
I
went
was
with
like,
the they
"No,
they
that's
went with they went with the politically expedient thing instead of the right thing.
yeah."
At least in terms of yeah, our sort of group's thinking at the time.
And I guess I grew up. I was very young, but I remember the Nixon impeachment hearings,
Hmm.
and I just thought, if holding the president responsible, and I think those were done. It took a period of time, but they were, very public and transparent and stuff, and I thought it was kind of the right thing,
Hmm.
But now I don't think. I think things are so polarized and divisive now. I don't think. I think both parties have kind of split into two different cults,
Sure.
And it doesn't matter what's right or wrong. It's just a matter of what party you're part of. And if you have a 50% system, you're never going to get over 50% for anything,
Sure.
so.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's value in sort of owning up to those past mistakes, whether it's the Nixon impeachment, Cheney. I would say to some degree, some of the missteps on the COVID response,
Oh
or
yeah.
even from the Democratic Party, going back to the Bernie, and we were sort of discussing this the other day, but what they did to Bernie, I think what they did to
Oh yeah.
Dean Phillips and Bobby and those all that, and then obviously, I can't speak too much about sitting president, being my commander in chief and all, but
Right.
just from the party perspective, their lack of accountability and some of those things as well.
So like, I think my word is disillusionment.
There you go.
I was
There you go. That's a good one.
disillusioned,
Sure.
and even with the COVID response, I remember that. I don't know if you want to talk about that in a little more detail, but I remember that in great detail because I was working in Midtown at the time. I had an office right by Times Square,
Mhm.
and I knew, because it was kind of a worldwide thing. I knew that was going to be a very historical event, so I tried to stay at the office as long as I could,
Sure.
because I'm
Sure.
like, I'm not leaving Midtown until they physically kick me out. So that happened the week after. I remember President Trump, he did the federal emergency on Friday the 13th on March, and then Governor Cuomo did the state emergency order. I think it was on the following Thursday,
Hmm.
and so I had not. I was just at work a few hours, and then the people from the building come and say, Governor Cuomo declared an emergency. You have to leave right away. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not leaving right away. I barely got here. I'm like, nothing's going to happen in a few hours. I'll leave at the end of the day. And I remember
Hmm.
walking out, and by then Macy's had already kind of gone to, um, people could work at home
Sure.
that week. And I was like, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to see everything and experience it
Yeah.
because I thought it's going downhill quickly. And I want to see it.
Hmm.
And I remember walking off the building that day, and it was just surreal because most of the people were gone. Times Square was pretty empty. I walked around Bryant Park, which is kind of a bit of a ghost town. It was
Hmm.
sort of it was like just a few survivors were walking around aimlessly, like me. Like,
Wow.
what's going on?
Mm.
It was quite dystopian.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know all of what incoming President Trump will do. I know that was a big point of emphasis for Bobby Kennedy's campaign that we would have some kind of like let's let's air it out and let's have a sort of not trial's not the right word, but almost like a hearing or some sort of cleaning up of all the things that did happen during COVID. Because there was a lot of mistakes and
At least a
there's
public airing of what really happened.
sure why were these decisions made, who knew what at what point, because like
Yeah.
a lot of people know like what it was not run well. So similar to even
No,
like,
and
go ahead, sorry.
it just it's almost like they didn't even really try to run it well. I just didn't get, like, I don't know, like there's just so much dystopian stuff. Like, I was in band when I was in high school,
Hmm.
so seeing these kids playing their band instruments through their masks, I'm like, who does this?
Right.
Or
Right.
seeing the band kids in their little tent pods.
Oh, okay. I didn't see those, but yeah, I can imagine. That's funny.
No,
Yeah, no,
they had the
that's
kids that were in these little tent
sure.
enclosures.
Sure.
This is just getting, like, it's worse than a movie. I was like, what is happening? And really, the kind of the whole public thing about this being like something that came out of the wet market in China.
Sure.
I'm like, I didn't. I was like, this doesn't make any sense because how would you know this so quickly,
Yeah.
like with such certainty?
They knew it right
Like, it
away.
doesn't seem
Sure.
like you would know this.
Sure.
But and then as it turns out that I think that was a kind of a contrived lie.
Sure. And all the, I mean, the monolithic nature of the mainstream media response to like to say
Yes,
anything that against that, anything that even questions that, which to your average person is like, wait a minute, like, yeah, how do they know this? How they know like
right,
right away, and
right.
we're sure it's not that Institute of Virology in the same city. Like,
Yes.
are we sure? That's a hard one to reconcile there. And then, oh, lo and behold, a few months later, oh, we were wrong. And then, okay, no, um, not justice, but no like
No
accountability,
accountability.
no accountability.
No,
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
even no mention. I mean, clearly, I guess we could name names. I'll say Dr. Fauci, who
Sure.
clearly was in charge of this. He's kind of like, well, I wasn't responsible for shutting down the government. I'm like, yes, you were. Like, you
Sure.
didn't physically have the power to do it, but people who did listen to you. And so when it came time to exercise his power of deception, he didn't wither away from doing that. But when it came time to own up to the actual truth, then he was like like a little slippery, little animal.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was like, this was a worldwide thing you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for the kids and stuff, the school age kids and especially the high schoolers who had to like miss their graduations and stuff like that and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
It was like really devastating.
hmm
And we're talking millions of people, and all of a sudden, like you said, the corporate media wasn't the least bit interested in holding anyone accountable for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's led to their downfall. Quite honestly, I think people are like now, with I think CNN and other stations are cutting staff, cutting budgets, and they're in a kind of a free fall crisis,
Right.
and they
And
deserve to be.
sure. And I think a lot of it was in addition to like the monolithic nature, but it was, I think, the early stages of this modern form we're seeing of so much censorship. They were using
Mm-hmm.
the misinformation and
Yeah,
malinformation, which is a new
yeah.
category, right? Like just if you
I never
disagree with
heard
the,
the malinformation.
yeah, it's a new one.
So there's
It
misinformation,
just
disinformation, and malinformation.
malinformation is information that's not technically incorrect, but it goes against the objectives of the government.
Really?
That's correct. That's Bobby Kennedy's made that point. That's not trying to steal his
Wow.
point, but that's in the Biden versus Kennedy lawsuit.
Oh,
Yeah, for which Kennedy won.
right. Oh, okay.
Within 36 hours of Biden taking office, it was massive censorship among a small group of people, including Bobby and some others. But yeah, but yeah, I think we need that sort of public accountability. Yeah,
You think we'll ever get it?
I don't know. I mean, I err on the hopeful side for this new administration coming in. Not that they're my favorite, but
Right.
that there's some potential to clean up some of those things. That they're at least a little bit more publicly stated intent to do some of those
Yes,
things. So
I agree. I'm a little more hopeful too.
sure, like, hey, I'll take the positives. Whoever's in office, you know, corporate
Well, that's
capture.
how. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how I think too. Yeah.
corporate capture needs to be cleaned up. Um, Bobby was the only one raising it that I've seen, and if he can make a dent into it, all the power to him, right? I mean, just yeah, government efficiency. I don't. That's a little bit of a wild mandate, but I'm hoping they do some good things. I can tell you there's a lot of bureaucracy in government. I've worked in different aspects of government, and there is definitely a lot of bureaucracy that doesn't have to be there. So
Really? Yeah, I'm sure you've seen
sure.
it like up front.
But there's a reason the movie Office Space is so universally hilarious and loved, you know?
I live that too. I used to work for a defense contractor, so and literally our office was very similar to that with the cubes, and it was a
Sure.
very very hushed tone because those cubes have this special sort of soundproofing,
hmm
and so you can kind of see people, but you can't really hear them because the soundproofing absorbs, and all you kind of hear is a sort of, you know,
Hmm.
of people, and you can't really hear what they're saying.
Yep.
So it is very strange.
I'm a people person.
I know. I think my favorite line from that movie was when the consultants come in and they're interviewing Peter,
Hmm.
and they're like, "Peter, we see you've been missing a lot of work." It's like, I wouldn't say I'm missing work.
I know. It was phenomenal. So
There were
funny.
so many great lines in that movie, to be quite
100%.
honest.
100%. Yeah. Uh, Switching gears a little bit, we can of course come back to politics, but I would love for you to tell our audience the story of the monorail and how you basically as one man with some support, but I think you really were the point man on killing the monorail proposal in Seattle. If you wouldn't mind.
I was definitely the first person
Okay.
to speak up about it. We had at the time I was president of a group called People for Modern Transit, and they were kind of a grassroots coalition group who had publicly supported the light rail vote back in '93 and '94 or '95, and then I what was it? I think after the light rail had kind of their budget meltdown, I became a little more active and started going to some meetings. And for some reason, I was approached and they wanted me to become president. So
Hmm.
I was president of that group, and then we continued with the light rail, and then the monorail came forward, and a lot of our members, because we were a transit group, they didn't want to publicly speak out against the monorail because it was technically transit,
Sure.
which I didn't really agree with. I'm like, no, it's not really transit. It's
So
just a proposal.
just to zoom out, let me know if this is right, but like, and this is around like 2008-ish, uh,
Before,
before 2005, 6, 7.
I mean, the time frame for the monorail.
Sure.
Wow.
I mean, I know it was built. I think it was built in the 60s, right, for the World's Fair
Yeah,
originally,
that was
but
the original 1 mile line, right?
but then early 2000s there was this discussion of like light rail or just extending the monorail. Is that roughly right?
Sort of, but not really.
Okay.
The branding was sort of, let's extend the monorail, but that really never was the thing,
Okay.
because it wasn't, that system was so old it wasn't really extendable. They'd have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch, and plus that terminated at the Seattle Center, so that was never going to be like the terminus.
Sure.
And then they had a couple different proposals. One was like this X pattern where it was went from like Capitol Hill through downtown, and then I think over to West Seattle. And the other pattern, X of the pattern, was um, Ballard through downtown, and then that went over, I think, through the Rainier Valley or something like
Okay.
that. But it was really just some activists who were transit supporters, and you get out your map and you get out your big, black Sharpie, and you just start drawing lines. And they're like, well, these are two lines, and this would be great if we had transit there, which I totally agreed with. It would be great if we had transit there,
Sure.
but that's not how it works,
Right.
because there's a lot of people that live under those black lines,
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
and all that costs a stupendous amount of money.
Yeah.
And so they ignored all of that, and so that kind of, and it went through several public votes. The first public vote was really, I think it was a $6 million initiative, city initiative of the people, to basically to spend $6 million to study the feasibility of really building the monorail.
Hmm.
And me, being, I guess, naive at that time, I thought, okay, well, they're going to do a very honest public assessment,
Sure.
and if it's not feasible, then they'll just throw in the towel. Well, that was never the case. That was
Mm.
never going to be the case from the beginning. The whole purpose, that was just sort of the first foot in the door.
Sure.
And from there, it went to another funding round, which also got passed. And then it kind of took on a life of its own, and then it became kind of the competition of against light rail. And then Sound Transit, unfortunately, they had their very big budget overrun, and that was right around 1999 into 2000, early
Okay.
2000. That's when that happened, and that's I think right about the time I became the president. I was somewhere in 1999, and then the monorail people stepped up and were like, "Let's just get rid of the light rail completely."
Sure.
And so then they were kind of on our turf, and I kind of ignored our group a little bit, and I didn't officially, I guess, speak on behalf of people from modern transit, but you know, we didn't have any like public events and stuff, but I would speak out, and I wrote letters to the editor and op-ed pieces. And then the Seattle Times, they asked me to write a couple of different editorials
Nice.
um, for the different initiatives. Yeah, so that was, and I did that
Nice.
gladly. Because you know, again, I thought the Seattle Times did a great job. They were very professional, and they wanted to get kind of a neutral airing of both sides and
Yeah.
get the issues out, and they did a great job on it. My issue, one of my big issues with the monorail was they kept promising that it would turn a profit, and I was like, I tried to work with the reporters, and I was like there's public transportation doesn't turn a profit, like anywhere in the country, like there's no system that turns a profit. And I think one of the responses was, well, we just want to give them, because they're like, well, this is really innovative. We just want to give them the benefit of the doubt.
They're just gonna
I'm like,
accomplish
oh,
something.
come on.
Yeah. Accomplish something never been done.
Right. No one in the world like has profitable transit, but they're like, well, we're hopeful they can do it. And so that just, I thought that that was one of my message points that never landed. I thought it was such an obvious thing,
Right.
but it took me probably 2 years before that really became something that the newspapers sort of embraced a little bit more. But they were
Hmm.
very slow to do that, which
Sure.
I thought was kind of one of their main points, because if you're lying about one thing, you're probably lying about other stuff.
Sure.
And their ridership numbers were just pure fiction, and
Sure.
the construction stuff, their artistic drawings of the monorail were like they have these massive beams that would have supported the monorail, and you look at the EIS documents, and they were like about as big as like a parking meter pole, in the drawings. They were just very small,
There's no
and I'm
way.
like, and I won't pull them out, but because I'm still working on my book. I'm working on a book on this. I still have the EIS documents right here in my bookshelf. So
Nice. That's hilarious.
if you want to,
It
yeah, if you want to do
reminds
another monorail show sometime, we can do it in much more detail.
sure. Well, maybe it'll be one of the episodes on your show too.
It might be
Yeah. Remind me we can plug that at the end too.
okay.
It reminds me of that episode of The Simpsons about the famous one about the monorail. Do you remember that one?
Well, yes, we have a story about that too.
Okay.
We This was somewhere during the campaigns. We tried to, I think it was in conjunction with the fundraiser.
Hmm.
We were going to show that video, that movie,
Yeah.
and we got sued because of the copyright
Sure.
issue. I think it was illegal to use that for fundraising purposes without, I think,
Sure.
permission from the publisher or something. So we got shut
Right.
down on that.
Okay. That's funny.
So they left no stone unturned. They went after
Sure.
all that, but that episode was surprisingly accurate.
Sure. All the
All the
promises.
time.
It's just like just has to be an out of town chuckster making it. But
Yeah.
okay. And so then at a certain point, I think were you brought in for like hearings on it? I seem to remember something like that.
We had hearings. I went to a number of hearings.
Sure.
A lot of those, well, the monorail had their own hearings on certain issues. They went through a period don't know if they were hearings or just meetings, but they went through a period where they called it the D bomb. It was DBOM. It was bringing in like a contractor to. It was
Okay.
like a partnering with a private contractor.
Okay.
I can't remember what that stands for. DBOM. D bomb. Wow, they used to roll right off my tongue.
Sure. It's all
But
right.
but they basically brought in this third party, and then during the negotiations, this was all secret because they had several parties that were bidding on this D bomb contract, and so they had to keep everything secret.
Hmm.
And that was, I think, that was around 9 months. I
Okay.
remember it was kind of like the same as a term of a baby.
Sure. Yeah.
And at the end of it, they kind of gave birth to this huge budget overrun.
Bad idea, baby.
Yeah, and that was very quickly the end of it. After that, um, the cost figures came out, and I don't think I really ever got credit for this, but one of the things I did was they were, well, we can get into the financing a little bit more if you want to hear. The financing was
Sure.
really fun. So they misjudged their revenue, so the revenue stream was like one third less than they had thought they were going to get. So they were, as a consequence of that, they weren't able to do all the to purchase the bonds that they wanted to purchase up front, so they wouldn't be able to pay for what they wanted to pay for, and they have their own cost overrun. So what they were planning on doing was borrowing as much as they could, and then out of that money that they borrowed, they used part of the borrowed money to pay off the bond payment. So they basically borrowed money to pay for the borrowed money.
Mhm. Right.
It's kind of like if you don't have a job, you take out a big loan and then pay the loan back with the money that you just borrowed.
Sure.
And then it was, I think, around a 5 or 10 year period where they wouldn't be paying off any principal at all
Right.
because they were just paying the money off with the borrowed money.
Sure.
And then after I think over time you get kind of an inflation of the MVET tax
Hmm.
with the car tabs and stuff. So after 10 years, they would have started paying some stuff off. Anyway, I called that basically, I called it bond kiting,
Nice.
like check kiting. I called it bond kiting, but I went through and did a calculation because that extended the term of the bonding, or they extended it to like 40 plus years, 45 years.
Okay.
When you do borrowing for that length of time, just with the curve
The amortization curve. Yep.
becomes kind of an exponential curve, and so you're
Right.
paying kind of an exponential amount of interest. And
Sure.
so rather than, and at the time, the convention with the papers was to quote the price of the project pre pre borrowing and pre bonding. So it was like a $1.7 billion project, but I had done these graphs and calculations and said, well, if you throw in the interest, you're getting essentially an $11 billion project.
That's totally different.
Right? That's a totally
Hmm.
different animal. Like typically you would pay back maybe 5 or 6 billion, but they were essentially going to be paying back over twice that.
Right.
And so I managed to get that out to the newspapers, and then there was an official sort of monorail anti-monorail group. I can't remember the name of them that they were called. Henry Aronson, who was kind of the spokesperson for the downtown association, they kind of picked him as kind of the point man.
Hmm.
And I worked with him really closely.
Hmm.
And I sort of fed him this calculation that I did with the $11 billion, and he had his people work on that more. And was it Jane Hadley from the Seattle PI? She kind of hooked onto that too and decided to run with it, or she thought it was a solid
Analysis.
calculation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good analysis, which it was. It was all totally accurate.
Hmm.
And by that time, and this was over a period of several years that this happened. By that time, the state treasurer of Washington State was also kind of sounding the alarm on the same issue, was the skyrocketing interest that they would be paying. Like he's like, this is totally not conventional.
Sure.
Usually you go with, I think it was 20 to 25-year bonding. So they were more than doubling that.
Right.
And so other people had, kind of sounded the alarm. And so we were kind of in line with that. These numbers were good. And I'll, I'll never forget the night before this article came out. I was sitting in a meeting at the monorail. I was going to monorail meetings pretty often. And where I work down in Soto,
Yeah.
when I came home at night, I kind of wound right through downtown, and the monorail office was just like a block or two from the bus stop. So it was
Mhm.
very close by. So I would go to a lot of those meetings, and I can't remember what day or year it was, but I remember the night of that meeting. Um, Henry came over to me and kind of whispered in my ear. He's like, tomorrow Jane Hadley's going to be releasing this article about the $11 billion monorail. So I just wanted to let you know.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, congratulations.
So that was the beginning, the very quick beginning of the end of,
Sure.
and I knew that was the end. That was
Sure.
that was the final thing, and I can't remember the timing exactly, but I think it happened probably within a period of weeks, maybe not days. I think the mayor of Seattle, Mayor Nichols at the time,
Hmm.
he had a press conference. I want to say it was just a few days after that article came out,
Sure.
and kind of pulled his support for the monorail. And so
Wow.
things kind of unraveled pretty quickly after that. Yeah, I was invited to that press conference, and so I was kind of behind the scenes, but
Sure.
I
It's a great story. No, I mean it's so I'm from Tacoma. I claim Tacoma as my hometown. I was born in Seattle.
okay
I was born right by that Starbucks we used to meet up at on Capitol Hill.
on Olive Way.
Yeah, yeah, by the
Okay,
Half Price Books.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I say Seattleites owe you a debt of gratitude for that, for dodging a big bullet, not a bullet train,
and
but
then
a big
and then
bullet.
we were even criticized. Well, I think it was one of my friends. He threw me a party on Capitol Hill at the Rosebud,
Okay,
and it was a great party. It was really, I got an award. I
nice.
don't know. I probably still have it here somewhere. It's like a little star.
Okay,
I think I have it on my. No, I don't know where it's at actually. But it's like this translucent star.
okay.
And, but we were criticized for celebrating because like it wasn't. We weren't
So
being polite. We were being impolite to the losers.
it's a win for the
And I'm like,
city. It's
I'm
a
like,
win.
isn't that what you do to the losers? It's like you don't worry about the losers. Like when you win, you're supposed to celebrate with the winners.
I mean, the city would have lost. It's just such an obvious win for the city, you know.
It would have been
It's
horrible.
yeah, it would have been horrible.
Everything about that proposal from the technology side was bad.
Hmm.
All their stuff was inaccurate. Their numbers were just pure fiction. The ridership numbers were
Way
fiction,
overinflated, yeah.
overinflated, and but I will say I had one guy in particular. I think wasn't at that party, but it was at another. He was celebrating at the party. It was another event that I went to. That he was a very very critical opponent of mine. He was an activist on Queen Anne, Lower Queen Anne,
Okay.
and he kind of confessed. He goes, I really used to hate you because you like were up against the monorail, but he goes, I have to admit you were right.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's good. What a mature thing.
So in the end, it all worked out, and it was, I would say, probably one of the very few instances where a government agency was completely eliminated. That doesn't happen very often.
Sure. Yeah.
Name another instance where a government agency was shut down.
Yeah. I mean, some during the Great Depression, but that's a little different,
Yeah,
like the Progress Works Administration and such. But no,
Right.
it's great. I've always thought it was a really cool story. I'm really proud of you for doing that. And it's I take a few lessons from it. One is just that like, you don't like this is not critique or anything, but you don't have any explicit like qualifications for that. Like, you're not a civil engineer. You're just a
Mm,
interested citizen. Like, you're just an informed citizen who cares and saw some obvious flaws in some of the reasoning and the thought process. You got involved and you were able to contribute something to, major metropolitan cities' plans. Really, I mean, if you can imagine it now, I mean, comparing like what they have now with the light rail, which I've only been on a little bit, seems like a relatively efficient system compared to
yeah.
what could have been with this disastrous plan, you know. So that, but also kind of bringing it back to the movement a little bit. I was just reflecting on this because we've been friends for a while, and just thinking about how we viewed our supporters, because you bring a lot to the table, and a lot of our supporters are just very interesting people, very intelligent, diverse backgrounds, have all kinds of skills they could offer. But in my view, and this is, you know, maybe a little bit hindsight being 2020, but we just viewed supporters for the most part as like just someone to give money to us to support our beliefs, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, you're not just in monorail stuff, but you had a ton of great computer skills, right? For your work, a lot of great political insights that you could have offered, like that you could have we could have had a very different relationship. Just like this is more a little bit me reflecting on the
Oh, yeah.
relationship we had with supporters, but it's like,
Right.
oh, this guy, he agrees with us, so he's just going to be a cash cow, and just like every week, hey, can you do this? Can you contribute? Can you contribute? Can you contribute? Right? Whereas the human side of you, right, has a lot more to
No,
offer.
I agree. Yeah.
Hmm.
That was kind of an untapped
Yeah,
sort of thing. I always viewed you guys as kind of a well, and I think I only went to your office once or twice. I just thought of you guys for the most part as kind of this really young group of kind of rowdy activists and stuff. And
sure.
but I always liked you were very like his very into like history and science and
Hmm.
really studying issue or not issues but just topics deeply.
Sure.
And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was very different for because I was in offices all over the country and got to work with different political groups and like democratic youth groups and stuff, and there was always an inability of some of those groups to put us in any kind of box, because we
Yes.
weren't we weren't some democratic youth. We're studying
Right.
Kepler and singing Bach in our free time, and
Right. Right.
we're genuinely passionate about it, and like no amount of money is going to sway us. We're like, no. Yeah, like so it was fun for that. And then so you ended up moving to New York at some point, and you were still sort of in touch with our movement there as well.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't know if I got a referral from you or how I got hooked up with them, but they had regular meetings down in like the Soho area.
Okay.
I mean, it was like in the basement of a YMCA or something like that.
Okay. I never really was too involved with. I would go out there for some events and things, but I never uh, did a lot of work with their office per se.
Yeah, and no, they were a good group, and it was different than a scatter group, but
Sure.
I just I don't know, I just like talking. I like talking about politics, but the Democrats and the Republicans is just so partisan, and it's just so personal,
Sure.
and it's just a huge turnoff. I just like talking about issues and stuff and learning about issues, and then I can decide how I want to pursue that or vote or whatever. But that's not how our party politics really runs anymore. And I think particularly in this last election with Trump and Harris, I think that was kind of a death blow for the Democratic Party because they just wouldn't talk about any issues,
Right.
anything.
It was
And
there.
people, and I think because we're in kind of a populist sort of mode or period of time, kind of worldwide, not just the U.S. but
Mm-hmm.
people, they want to hear answers about issues and about questions that they have. And when you just revert to talking points that ignore your questions, they're not going to support you. And I think
Sure.
Kamala Harris found that out firsthand. That she just her slick talking points weren't moving the needle at all, or they were moving the needle, but just in the opposite direction.
I know her refusal to go on Rogan's podcast. I mean,
Yes,
the fact that the mainstream media was editing her already short interviews,
yes,
like that, those are not confidence inspiring. Um, and I mean, I don't know, benefit of the doubt a little bit. Maybe, I mean, if you're a vice president, you should have the mindset that you're prepared to go in to become the president at the drop of a hat, right? Um, or the firing of a pistol, God forbid.
yeah.
Um, but she just did not seem that prepared. But more so to your point, just the whole platform seemed to be we're anti-Trump and we're just going to hope to just paint him negative, negative, negative. Whereas to his credit, I mean, he's talking about things he wants to do. It was much more like positively centered. We want to do these things. Um, they would be negative about Vice President Harris, but it was less so, it seemed.
That's kind of my feelings too. But the corporate media kind of painted it the opposite way.
Hmm.
They would take these clips and then they would just, well, and there's a few different things. They would take clips and sort of redefine the message based on their editing, which to me is absolutely infuriating because it's hard enough getting across the point. But when you take someone's message that's accurate and edit it to make it inaccurate to meet
Sure,
your purposes, that's really pretty unforgivable.
sure.
It's one thing if someone speaks out and says something bad. It's one thing when they're being 100% correct and reasonable and you edit their words to twist them for a quote media outlet to do that. It's really unforgivable.
Sure. And it's funny because it's such a reinforcing negative spiral in a sense because now your general
Mm-hmm.
population develops a deep and widespread distrust of those same institutions. Used to be a very valuable public institution, right? The
They used to be.
the fourth branch, to keep all elected officials accountable, right? And just to do honest, fair reporting. And it certainly has become polarized. The social media and related algorithms don't help either with that
No,
respect
they
because
don't.
they drive towards polarization and inflaming reactions, etc. So you don't get the fair report. So yeah,
No,
you were saying earlier, we hope that with the demise of mainstream media, because it's kind of slowly collapsing, and I think some of the more democratic ones have had a more sharp decline since the election, which honestly I think is pretty good. It's probably useful, but maybe more independent, fair voices will come on board. And I think maybe they're just gonna wise up and realize that's what Americans especially really want. They want a more fair perspective. But who knows? Not sure. Maybe you got to get your show up and running. We'll see.
well,
Put a comment down, my audience, if you'd like to see Richard start his own podcast on politics.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I think well, I've always been not well, I'll say a couple of things. One thing I think that gets you like viewers is I call it freak show media. When you say freaky things, and I've seen people who have their podcast, they will kind of title things a
sure,
certain way, which is maybe sometimes a little misleading,
sure.
but they do that because they know it will get more viewership.
Hmm.
And so there's a little bit of that going on. But with with platforms like YouTube, you're kind of
Channel.
your own maker. Like,
Yeah,
and it's affordable. And me as just a person, I can have huge viewership, and it's not going to cost me anything more than like I don't have to spend $1 million to get my first viewer.
sure.
And I can have 1 million viewers at the same price as I have like one viewer.
Right. Hmm.
So it's kind of cool.
It is. It's amazing. Yeah. Potential revolution.
Um, yeah, and I've been reading about this for a long, long time. Well, there's a whole, I could go into a whole different thing. I bought this book at a book fair a long time ago. It's called Be the Media.
Okay.
And the I'm sure have you heard of chief digital officers?
Sure.
So he's the guy that invented that position.
Okay.
He used to be a consultant at Ernst and Young.
Okay.
And I think I met him as he was retiring. And I went to a book fair. This is right when I moved to New York.
Hmm.
Um, he was exhibiting at a book fair, and I was, I'm still in the process of writing my first book. So I went there and met him, and he autographed one of my books, and we were in touch for a while. And then he went on to create this movement to create the chief digital officer. I remember he sent me an email several years ago, probably been 5 or 6 years ago now, maybe a little bit more. They were picking the icon for the organization.
Okay.
Like, what do you think of this icon?
Nice. That's funny. That's
It
cool.
was yeah, it was kind of funny. Well, it's kind of weird. You don't know where greatness is, and sometimes you're very close to greatness and you don't even realize it.
Right.
Or people who go on to do huge things.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I remember I can't remember, it was a T-shirt line. I remember sitting on the plane one time next to this young woman, and it was a brand new T-shirt line, and it had like it was a branding, and she mentioned the name. I can't remember the name anymore. But it became huge.
Okay.
He's like, she goes, in 6 months, we're gonna be all over the country,
Wow.
and sure enough, they were.
Nice. Nice.
It's crazy.
Going back like a couple topics, I don't want to round back and get something you said. Um, that you're more interested in, as am I, in more of like the issues and the policies versus the politics. I think the
Yeah,
politics can be so grimy and such. And that was something I
yeah,
always really enjoyed about uh, my group that I was in. We definitely had our mistakes and our missteps, especially with hindsight. But in general, we had the ability to evaluate our own policies based on just what they were, not as because they were Democrat or Republican or whatever. They were just, I mean, even I was telling my second guest, Joanne, that because she's in Australia, so I don't think she follows American politics as much, but uh, Trump, of all people, has brought up in simplified format the NWAPA plan. So the North American Water and Power Alliance, that whole plan to
oh
bring,
wow, I barely
right?
remember that. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's y'all can look it up. NAWAPA, North American Water and Power Alliance. I still think it's a pretty good idea. You're bringing some surplus water from three Alaskan rivers down through a natural series of channels. We had to build some pipes. We had to build a lot of stuff, but down to bring fresh water for irrigation down to the Southwest United States. And it's a massive infrastructure plan. It would take at least 10 years to build, but it's like hardcore infrastructure jobs, the cement, the rail, the power generation, new dams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I would not have expected Donald Trump to be the person to champion the idea, but
right.
he's kind of a maverick. So, like, hey, again,
He is
I'll
a
take,
maverick, right?
yeah, again, I'll take it. Sure. If he's the guy to build it, I was imagining in my head it was more of an old school FDR Democrat,
Right. Oh
but
yeah,
but it's good for the country, right? So like whatever, like you never
and
know.
you might be able to even get like a free monorail in there too,
Yeah, we're gonna build a separate monorail along the whole path.
right on top of it. Yeah,
We'll just use a black pen and we'll mark it out and
exactly. You just need
good
a black pen.
good to go.
Yep,
Mountains
yep,
don't matter.
yep.
So that was one thing to our credit, that we did have that ability at least. And we would engage people from both sides, people from all sides, depending on whatever topic it was. Some of them would lean more left and right, or whatever. But
Well, that's a topic in and of itself. What is left and right?
sure, it's
Like who like what issues left and what issues right? That's where the labeling of that, and we're so entrenched in that. Like now it's instead of left and right, you just say red and blue.
Mhm.
And so, if you're a Democrat, you can just disinvite all of your red relatives from Thanksgiving and tell them not to show up.
I
You know,
know. If you were to, so one of the reasons I joined, I joined for many, many reasons, but a big one was I was against neoconservatism, and I didn't know it
oh,
by I didn't know it by that name. I just knew that our foreign engagements didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me in,
right,
my 18, 19, 20-year-old brain. But if you were to tell your average Democrat, hey, there's a party, they're going to be against neoconservatism, and they're going to be for free speech and for infrastructure development, say, oh yeah, Democrat, easy. No, like no
right,
question about that. Now
right.
it's unquestioned the opposite.
It's pretty much flipped completely. The
It's
two
flipped
parties have almost completely flipped, I think,
in the last like 10 years.
10 years. Yeah,
And it's hard for people to reconcile that because we do get caught up in the, oh, I don't like Trump or I don't like, like I don't like the liberals, whatever. Like both sides have their views of it, you know. I think a lot of your average people are more like you're like I just care about the issues. I just care about, like I'm big on working class or something, right? So they might that's a lot of those people that went from the Democratic to the Republican Party because the Democrats, according to Bernie Sanders' point, they abandoned the working class, which I think is
yeah,
largely accurate, you know. So
they definitely have, and that's why with my new show. Well, you mind if I give a little clip on it?
please plug it, please.
So I kind of test marketed this branding. So my branding I call it pocket politics.
Hmm.
So it would be kind of my goal would be kind of short, in-depth conversations about different issues because especially with the new administration, because I think President Trump is pretty issues focused, and every issue has a lot of detail that never gets covered beyond talking points.
Sure.
And I think with the internet now, I think there's people who want to listen and people who want to be informed, but they don't know where to get the information from, and it does take some time and you know time to sort of clearly box up details because you can get really caught up in every issue has a million details,
Sure.
but you can get to a level of detail that's more than a talking point and have it still be useful. And so that's kind of what I want to do is sort of have packaged, pocket politics. So you kind of keep it in your, keep the information in your pocket. And so when you're talking, you can kind of pull it out and say, oh, what about this detail? What about this detail? And have it be beyond a talking point, but not have it be too um, in the weeds, I guess.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, I think there's a craving for
I
deeper, I
think
mean,
I think I think
deeper
there's a
discussion.
craving. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
deeper discussion. I know I've definitely gravitated toward podcasts over the years just for that reason. Like I want the full discussion. I want deep dives. Let's go deep.
Yep,
Like
yep.
books aren't deep enough.
Oh,
Go even deeper. I want, the back and forth and the
the back
prod.
and forth is very engaging if you have the right people and the right information.
Hmm.
Because when you interview someone who is knowledgeable, well, in their head they have hundreds of books that they've read, and then their mind is kind of synthesizing all that information in a digestible form
Sure,
for you. And then now with the cheap video formats and stuff, you can access just amazing people
sure.
all over the world. It's really stunning. So
It is pretty awesome.
yeah. So I used to really be afraid of the mainstream media kind of withering away.
Uh-huh.
And now I'm like, I can't get rid of them fast enough.
Sure,
I wish they would go away tomorrow because I think there's people out there, and I think the void would be filled pretty quickly with other voices, and the marketplace would prevail, and something better will. Well, I shouldn't say would. It will because I think the corporate media and cable media they're done.
sure.
They're going. The people have voted against that or
Yeah.
for that.
One thing I'm very much hoping happens in this next administration, and Bobby stated it as a goal, but to get rid of pharmaceutical advertising on mainstream media will be huge. I mean,
That's all there is.
that's all there is. I know, but so the
Like
U.S. and
90% of TV ads is pharmaceuticals.
sure, but it's a vested conflict of interest, and there's been countless stories about how that works, right? A lot of the major news anchors get huge profits, huge salaries from those pharma companies, and so you just can't trust what they say, and
No.
you know that there's a overarching narrative that's being pushed down, and there's a lot of cases of that. That would be great. I
Oh
want to go.
yeah.
I want to go back to something else. I forget exactly what you said that prompted it, but thinking about your view of the organization, um, because you got to see them over a pretty large period of time as a lot of things are moving politically, and you got to see a couple different locations. But how effective would you say their initiatives were? Or did you see examples of where they were or where they weren't or anything along those lines?
That's an interesting point. I would say effectiveness wise, I probably wouldn't rank that very highly, quite honestly.
Sure.
I don't be, and I'm not necessarily blaming the group in particular. I do know, and I'm sure you know this, I think the LaRouche group was sort of viewed as kind of radioactive with the media, and the Democratic Party certainly didn't want to have anything to do with the LaRouche people.
Sure.
So I think other than you directly getting your message out to people, I don't think you had any sort of earned media.
Hmm.
And so I think any like the NOAPA plan, which I do remember that now. God, I forgot we had talked about that, and I saw presentations about that.
Yeah.
But I was like, and I don't claim to understand it all, but I'll just trust you if you're on board with it. I just thought, what an amazing sort of big picture, big thinking infrastructure project this was,
Hmm.
and it seemed pretty thoughtful,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. That's that's kind of what kind of came about during what I guess it would be our the FDR days, I guess, when we had all the like the hydroelectric dams
Oh,
and
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
all of that, which you can't even conceptualize doing something that big these days.
Yeah. The Four Corners, the Grand
Like the
Coulee
Grand Coulee
TV.
Dam,
Yep. TVA. Yeah.
it's inconceivable that you would even,
Yeah.
you know, now we're kind of like, can we take out that stop sign?
It's going to be 1.1 billion.
Right?
And the
I
only
haven't
way
done
it's
it in 8 years. 8 years.
and the only way it's going to work is if we put a monorail there instead.
Right?
I know it speaks to the a deep, broad scale optimism about the country to build something like that. Bobby Kennedy Sr. as a senator signed on to that legislation back in the day. Just gives you a sense of how old it is as an idea.
The Nawapa?
The NWAPA.
Really?
Hmm.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, pretty cool. We had that in one of our documentaries about it. Yeah, but that's
But I think you guys made inroads in the DC because you lobbied a lot in DC, right?
we did. We a friend of mine, I won't dive him out if he doesn't want to be named, but a few friends of mine, um, just basically cold calling people they thought might be interested in, and kind of finding similar people like yourself, and just these experts in their specific field, water or canal systems or dams or whatever, and just organize this ad hoc group to say like almost like a pre feasibility study to just look
Oh,
at the
right.
specifics, like where are we going to build this specific canal? Let's look at and they had like conferences over a period of years to flesh out the legislation to make it work. And we were actually getting it inroads. I was in Virginia at the time, but doing work in DC somewhat. And I wasn't doing a lot of legislative work on that piece, but we were getting more and more support, including some Republican senators that were like, there was like we had a few senators ready to step out for it, and then I think we switched for some I think less than intelligent region. We switched off into something else because we're just
Oh, really?
making headway. Yeah, our campaigns shifted policy. Not like we went against it, but we just focused on something else.
Something else.
Yeah, it was there's
Did the Democrats receive that at all, or
I think there was some so yeah, I think the primary support was from Democratic lawmakers, but we had some. Yeah,
okay,
it was a good example of like a nonpartisan issue that we just were like, look, this could be
right?
very bipartisan. We could really rally around this and move beyond the like this or that, and just Americans would be happy because it was before all the droughts in California too, and so we're like, we told you
Oh,
so, you know?
right.
Yeah, I think it was the governor before Jerry Brown, governor before
Hmm.
Newsom. He gave a speech with his back to the Pacific Ocean, and he's just saying, "There's no water." Uh, anyway, yeah, I do raise that. I mean, I can point to examples where we were effective, and I was more curious about, an outsider your view because you were aware of what we were doing, and you were aware of a lot of the political discussion in the country overall, and then like, okay, we're advocates for certain things, and we talk to people about it, but then like, kind of looking at what did we ever really accomplish? Like we raising issues into the global discussion. I mean, even on that HBO show Girls, they had a whole thing about Glass-Steagall, which like 100% came from us talking about Glass-Steagall. you
Oh
know,
man, I forgot about that too. See, I
yeah,
was 100% with that. I thought that was
for
a very
Glass-Steagall.
important issue. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, probably remains a big issue, but yeah.
I think it does. Yeah.
Hmm.
Although it seems we're moving kind of more and more in the opposite direction.
Sure. Okay, and then I mean, you don't talk about this if you don't want to, but at a certain point, you were sort of stopped being involved with the movement. Is that right?
Yeah, I think. Well, well, part of it was I moved out of New York. I moved. I live in, like I said, I live in Somerville now. I think that. I'm not sure if I think I might have slowed down my involvement before that. I can't remember honestly,
Sure.
but one of their key kind of activist fundraisers, I can't remember his last name, Jerry, but he was, I guess, kind of my funding person. I would meet with him and
Sure.
um, talk to him, and then he would collect checks and stuff. He passed away, and I think that was he kind of provided, I think, a lot of the momentum of the group, and I think they sort of kind of quickly slowed down after that, if I recall
Sure.
correctly.
Sure. Yeah, with Lynn passing away, their group split up into two as well. So it kind of fractured, and they had some difficulties from that. So I don't know, it might have been similar or I don't know, unrelated, but
Right.
yeah. Okay. So let's see. So you're leaning towards a podcast, or you think you will be doing this?
I'm pretty sure I'm going to do something. Yeah.
Okay. And you're looking at the beginning of the next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm working on my book, and then I've got my publisher who's publishing my book. Her company also does podcast support.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
yeah, and then I might be moving. I'm either going to be moving and putting in a studio, or I have an office I might be renting and using that as a studio for a while.
Okay.
So
Nice.
yeah, well, I work my corporate job, and I'm just getting not really burned out. I enjoy what I do, but I want to get more of a creative element of doing something. And
Sure.
I just see all these people with their podcasts now,
Sure.
and you just stumble across all these people.
Hmm.
Um, one kid, I don't know, I think he's like 15 years old, and I was just listening to him today. His name is Matthew, and that's his podcast name. It's just Matthew.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where he's somewhere in the United States, but he's just like a high school kid or maybe in college,
That's
and
great.
he just he talks about kind of how depressed he is, or he's kind of like he's very philosophical, like a 50-year-old. And he talks about these really philosophical things about the meaning of life,
Okay.
and
That's
but
fun.
there's all but it's kind of there's some gloom and doom to it, like what's the point of living? Kind of, you know,
Right.
because see, I think he's so overwhelmed. I'm not really sure, but then and then he says some very clever things. But I just stumbled across him the other day, and he was talking about he was so happy because he just got the over the 5,000 viewer mark.
Oh, nice.
He has 5,000 subscribers, so he's like, he goes, if he can get 5,000, you can get a billion.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm like, well, you're clearly not depressed because that's a pretty optimistic statement,
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good. I like that. Yeah, there's
right?
so many interesting channels of content out there. Um,
And
what's the
YouTube seems to have sort of, I call it like the random algorithm.
hmm
It seems because you go down your little rabbit holes based on what you're watching.
Sure.
It seems like every now and then I will just get a random, like this kid, he was just a kind of a random pop up.
Right.
I don't know if they did that deliberately or I'm not sure how that works, but it seems like I'll get stuff really off topic on occasion,
hmm
and I like that. That's kind
Yep.
of like that's because that's kind of what a newspaper used to provide.
Sure.
Like a newspaper would force topics in front of you
hmm
that you didn't pre-select,
hmm
and I wish YouTube would do more of that,
Right.
but they don't. But I think that would help tremendously in sort of unraveling some of the division that we have if these electronic social media sites would put other content in front of us other than what we searched for or
Yeah.
that they want us to like because I and I'm not sure how to exactly have that programmer presented, but that's one thing I miss from a newspaper is you read, you just flip through a newspaper and you're seeing all kinds of stuff that editors and writers from
Sure.
all different backgrounds, you know, put in front of you, and you never would have searched for it,
hmm
but it may be something you're very interested in that you just stumbled across. And I think that's a one thing I really miss from the newspaper kind of world.
Yeah.
I remember when I first moved to New York in 2009. Um, it's kind of sad, but I think a lot of our lives they sort of they depend on a Starbucks. So I used to go to this one Starbucks on like 10th Avenue, and I would read my New York Times. Like I would have subscriptions for a long time, and I had the physical paper, and I just read it there. And then sometimes I'd spend an hour or two reading this newspaper, and
Yeah.
I just never could have imagined not having a newspaper in my hand.
hmm
And now I
When
haven't
was
bought a
last?
newspaper. And
Yeah.
occasionally I'll buy someone like if there's a good headline, I'll buy it. But other than that, I don't have any subscriptions to any print right now. I have some online subscriptions, but a lot of stuff you have online, you don't necessarily go there every day and read it because
Yep.
it doesn't force itself on you. It's just like an email.
Sure.
So,
I think Andrew Yang had some good ideas about the problem you're addressing right now for social media algorithms and also for financing local news, local news organizations
oh,
to kind of get that back. And I think he had some smart ideas on some of that stuff too. But
I think that's important. And I think with the downfall, I think of the cable media, and I think kind of the continued move toward multimedia,
mhm,
it seems like our news sources are somewhat becoming more localized again.
sure.
Like I find, like even on my phone, there's just a local kind of just a local newspaper out here in the Somerville area, and I get notifications about them quite often.
Hmm.
And it's just very local stories,
Yeah,
nothing earth shattering, but
sure.
I like that.
Yeah, agreed. To kind of final questions because I
Okay.
know the Seahawks game's on. But
Yep.
um, what advice would you give to the organization if you could, just given your view of it, just right near it, you know, if I mean if you want them to be successful or something, given everything we've talked about.
I mean, the LaRouche organization.
Yeah,
So I guess I was going to ask you this: how active are they right now, and what are they working on? What's
I'm not that sure.
not okay?
No, I mean I've extended invitations to any of them to come on.
Okay.
Not as platforms for there to talk about all their policies, but more to talk to them as individuals and like why
Right.
they join and why they. I think a very interesting question is like why do you continue to support this, right? And not from a negative, just like just tell me your
Right.
story, right? Like what inspired you?
Right.
Because it's I realized in this initially was meant to be like a memoir, but with multiple people's input, so like anyone could
Hmm.
annotate or comment or add appendices. But then I realized that's not really the story. The story is really more all these people and like the diversity of experience.
Hmm.
Some very good, some very negative, and we're kind of cover it all, right? But yeah, and if if you don't have a suggestion, that's cool. Maybe even more so thinking back to when your
Well, I
last
guess
last
I can throw in one thing.
sure,
My in terms of advice, I think I kind of what I mentioned before. I've never come across like, and I'm kind of a YouTuber, but I've never come across any like podcasts or videos or any information from the LaRouche group about what issues they're talking about. So
yeah,
it kind of follows in line. I don't know if they're still place based, if they have, on site gatherings of people and they present stuff, but it seems like their electronic presence is not really there.
yeah. I think even when I was in, I and it's one of those hindsight things, right? But like we missed the ball. Is that the term? We missed the opportunity. Um, we didn't jump
Missed
on
the
the
boat.
ball. Missed the boat. Thank you. Missed the boat on the podcast revolution because I
You're in the
think
Navy, are you?
I'm still in the Navy. Yeah. Never been on a Navy ship though. I'm a shore sailor.
All
Um,
right.
but we missed the boat on the podcast revolution. We had a lot of people that would really do well, just because they can think so intelligently and speak over so many topics, right? But I think our issue and our mistake was being very insular and being too like anxiety prone or like worried about like what like the other people could use it as an opportunity to attack us, etc. Right? And so we should have been dominating the podcast circuit in the early days, but we missed it. Um, and I think we still
No,
they
I would disagree.
okay,
The podcast revolution is still, and I
sure,
think you could argue it's just beginning
sure,
because I mean, we're not at the very beginning, but like this book that I bought, Be the Media, I bought that like 10 years ago. That was
hmm
really before everything started. But now with the downfall of the more cable and corporate media, I think the the search is on for better sources where people are actively looking for stuff and they're willing to pay for it.
sure,
And so you can get subscriptions and stuff. People will pay like $1 or two, per show.
right,
Whereas I think 5 years ago that probably wasn't the case. But now people are like, I want some information. I'm willing to pay like a modest price. And now the news media, like the newspapers and stuff, Boston Globe and those, they are finally putting their paywalls back up, and they're not giving away all their content for free anymore. They're like, if you want to read this article, you need to subscribe like $1 for 2 weeks or whatever.
sure,
And I do that, and it's a modest amount of money.
sure,
Um, and I think that was a huge mistake probably 15, 20 years ago when all the newspapers were like, they gave away all their content for free and they thought they could make it up with advertising.
sure,
But now the paywalls are back up, you can speak out and get an audience and have people pay for it.
sure, and have more independent voice. The advertising model is really one of the worst models. So I'm glad at least we're moving beyond that. Yeah, I was more
Yep.
referencing sort of back in my day. I think we had more people that had a little bit more diversity of intelligence with respect to the podcast domain of topics, more so.
Okay.
We had a lot of, especially our youth members, leave the organization. And when I think
Oh,
some of them would have been the best to have on. That's
oh, I got it.
I think they still have some people here and there. I'm not sure. I don't really follow them too much because not really my story is like the movement overall. And if they
Right,
want to come on and tell me about it, cool. You know,
right.
they're welcome. But yeah, so that makes sense. I think that's probably good advice for any group, but I think it would apply to them as well. So that's cool. Final question, two-part. What's the book about? And anything you want to plug or final thoughts?
My book is about kind of the light rail, my light rail lobbying experience, and I wasn't going to, and I'm not fully sure yet, but I wasn't really covering the monorail per se, but I think I'm gonna put at least a chapter or so in this book about that, and I might even have another separate book about the monorail because, and then especially since you asked about it so much, there's a ton of information that would make its own standalone book
Okay,
really like on its own. There
sure.
is really a lot of information about that. I think that nobody really knows about,
That'd be interesting.
and I think people should know it because these things they keep coming up. They're like, oh,
Hmm.
let's put it in a monorail because they're so easy and beautiful, and even the Simpsons had a monorail. It's like
Sure.
it's just simple.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but primarily, it's about kind of the life of the well, I think like you were saying with the with your stuff with LaRouche, it's not so much focused on the the details and the numbers and stuff. It's more the people, kind of a people powered sort of part of the initiatives behind the scenes as far as
Mhm.
what people were doing and how things happen between different groups and all the unknown and unsaid stuff that kind of, to be quite honest, I'm the only one that really knows about all of it because
Sure.
I seem to have been pulled in on a million different things. I don't. Well, here's a very specific thing. I don't know if you remember this. At one time, I think you were living in Seattle. I think this was still back then. They had in the Seattle Times. They had a big flyer that came out about the monorail. It was like an insert.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you remember that or remember
Not
reading it.
not particularly, no.
It was a separate insert of about 20 or 30 pages, and they had a marketing group down in Belltown that uh, they had commissioned to work on that. And in the final hours, for some reason, they decided they needed to call me up and to get my opinion on it.
Hmm.
And so, like at 10 o'clock one night, or 9 or 10 o'clock, they call me up and they're like, "Hey, can you come down to our office? We're trying to finish up this monorail insert for the Seattle Times, and we want to review some of this stuff."
Hmm.
And so I was down there like all night working on this insert, like kind of editing it with them because they weren't exactly sure how to present everything. And I was like, "Whoa, maybe you should have called me like a few days before." But I
Right.
was happy to help them. But I just thought it was weird that at the 11th hour you decide to call. Like I was very well known as far as my work and my position with the monorail,
Hmm.
but for some reason they decided they needed a little expert help at the last second.
Nice. That's funny.
And they had beautiful offices. I loved working on there. I was like, man, you got some great digs here.
That's funny. Yeah, Belltown's nice.
Yeah, it was nice.
Hmm.
So I still have a few copies of that insert, and that's the kind of stuff I could even put into like a standalone monorail book because all this it's just really fascinating the stuff that goes into supporting or opposing a project.
Sure.
And one thing I would say, I don't think I've said this yet, um, for anyone who's wants to be active in a group, you have to have a simple message, have it be accurate that you
Hmm.
can defend, be consistent with that, and just be patient. And you're going to have to spend a lot of time, sometimes years, usually
Sure.
years.
Yeah.
You know, um, And it doesn't take a lot of people. I would say at our core group, we only had probably 50 people who were really active with almost no funding.
Sure.
That was one of the things when they elected me president. They're like, they said they wanted someone had who was with the media or had media connections or who had some power
Hmm.
or was well funded. And like, well, I'm not well funded. I'm not really a powerful person, but I said like I've written like letters to the editor and I've done editorials. I said I can probably do some earned media and stuff like that.
Sure.
So that was my route, and that turned out to be pretty successful actually.
It's wild. 50 people with a dedication can shut down a uh, ill thought out $11 billion project.
Pretty much, we did
That's
it.
that's great. That's great. Yeah, if
It
nothing
was
else.
it was very like I said in the end when they shut down the whole agency, I really didn't consider the sort of monumental accomplishment until I really probably a few years later,
Sure.
where I was like, no, we shut down an agency completely. There's not $1 of public money being spent on that anymore.
Yeah.
That almost never happens.
Yep. No, that's yeah. You gotta call Vivek and Elon, let them know.
I know. I've thought of that. I was gonna send Donald Trump a Christmas card. I live literally just 5 miles away from his golf course out here in Bedminster.
Okay.
So I was like, hey, maybe we can have lunch sometime at your golf course, and I can work for the DOT or something.
Yeah.
Clean up that agency.
Yeah.
I'll be like, because I don't think you should have to spend 8 years to get a stop sign put in.
Sure. I know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, any final thoughts for this show and this topic and all of that? All
No, I
right.
think we covered a good.
Awesome. Yeah.
I will
Anything,
just say happy Thanksgiving and
happy
anything else, what?
Thanksgiving. Anything else you want to plug?
Oh, not right now.
Okay.
Um,
If you do later, like get some links for your book or your podcast, send them to me. I can add it and then comments, the notes to this show too, so that people that are
oh,
watching the show
nice.
later, yeah, please just remind me. I mean, I'll
Do you know
forget to ask
when you plan on publishing this?
next couple days.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So get to writing real fast. No,
Send me the link to it.
100%.
Does this go on YouTube or
Just YouTube.
okay?
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much
Perfect.
for coming, Richard. I really appreciate it. It's been nice to reconnect and kind of reminisce a little bit and
Definitely,
talk about it.
yeah. And maybe. Well, let me ask you. So you have your show. How long have you
Mhm.
been doing this, and What kind of time do you spend on it?
This is the third episode. I have a couple others recorded that require more special handling. So they're just sort of in the back burner. Um, it's only been going on for a couple weeks, really.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it started initially as I wanted to write a memoirs and then have like multiple degrees of annotation. And that was somewhat related to this project I have on Shakespeare, on his problem plays. It's a whole other discussion. But if anyone's interested, on the same YouTube channel, you can see my other podcast. Well, I have two other podcast series. They're very limited runs, each of them. This one I expect to go longer, but one is on Shakespeare, one's on Navy topics. But
Oh,
a much deeper dive into thus far only one of Shakespeare's plays, Merchant of Venice, and I did my grad degree in Western literature, and my focus has been Shakespeare for some time. And reading all the academia on it, I just was not satisfied that anyone really knew what these plays were about. I just was never.
oh,
It was just they were really no
really?
correct. And Merchant of Venice is a lesser known play for sure. It's generally considered as one of his problem plays, which just means that people have difficulty defining it in terms of some simple structural genres like drama or tragedy or comedy more so. Um, So I had a unique hypothesis on it, but it required a lot of depthful looking into it because like you might get a scholarly paper on, let's say, the Old Testament references with respect to the play, but they're really just narrowly focused on those references themselves, and they're not looking at how does this inform our larger view of what the play is. Um, just as one example. And like I
Hmm.
was like just desperately reading through all the academic writings I could to find like there's got to be someone out here who shares my view on this play. And I think it's more complex. I think it's more complete. That's biased, of course, but I can't find anyone. So I wanted to create a website which had multiple degrees of like annotations. You could have footnotes, but you could also have footnotes based on like this line or this word or these two lines or this um, paragraph or this page or this character, and then have the ability to have multiple lenses. This is like a third stage project for it to show the different types of literary analysis you could apply to it. So, structuralism, feminism, Marxism, historical, historicist, like all the different flavors. Because then that would be like a deeper question of what do these lenses tell you about the play? Because I think that's, you might have heard of the postmodern paradox, like
Hmm.
infinite levels of interpretation. Like what does that yield to you, right? It's like what is that? You're kind of left with this existential, almost like that YouTuber, that young YouTuber you talked about, right? It's like where do we
Oh,
go with this, right? Michael, or Matthew.
Matthew.
Matthew. Um, so that is a longer term thing because I think something like this would be the best solution I can think of to that postmodern paradox is to incorporate a concept from biology of consilience, which is the hypothesis, and this is I'm going to butcher the idea of consilience, a guy named E.O. Wilson, but it's the hypothesis with more corresponding correct hypothetical views of a process is more correct. So it's almost like an anti-Occam's razor. It's like not the simplest answers, the more complex while also true hypothesis or series of hypotheses is more accurate. So anyway, that's a real long tangent there, but that's something I love, and I do want to write a book on it. But I realize a website would be more useful because it's beyond just text. It had to be like a massively
Right.
long book
Right.
versus a simple, elegantly designed website. So anyway, so then I realized the story was more the people, and then I just like, okay, let me just get people on here. So
Yeah, that's kind of where I went with my book because I it's hard to present, and you get so lost when you start presenting numbers in depth and stuff. It just becomes very long and tedious, and people don't want to read all that detail.
sure,
Like I might understand it because I lived it, but when you're kind of a casual reader, you kind of want to you kind of want to live the story,
right,
and some of the facts are important, but not the level of detail at all times. I think it gets very I think you'll lose people very quickly.
sure,
So, but I what I found is all the different stories and like the meetings and stuff, and just like the story I told you about, Henry coming up to me, all those little insider things that I was part of that nobody really knows about, have never been talked about or covered or whatever. I think for
hmm,
historical purposes, I think those are very important. Well, and really one very critical thing, which kind of is going to live on forever, is the choice of the surface light rail in the Rainier Valley versus the elevated or tunnel.
sure,
Because most people today, they think that was a huge mistake, the whole surface stuff.
sure,
And you can say, well, the choice wasn't surface or tunnel. The choice was surface or nothing. There wasn't a third choice about tunneling. That wasn't on the table.
sure,
But it's easy to say after the fact. Well, and again, it's like I guess they call it presentism when you
hmm,
revise history based on the present.
sure,
Like, well, you can say they should have done, the tunnel option, but if you look at the history, there wasn't a tunnel option. That wasn't
sure,
on the table. It's only on the table in your mind.
right.
You're looking at a different history that never existed.
Well, I'm glad you're setting the record straight, and yeah, I think the two books would be interesting. I think you'd have an audience for both. and I wish you well on that
Spencer, I have
course.
a bunch more books too.
I bet.
What I found is once you start like committing yourself to writing a book, it's just like I have all these other ones. I don't think I have them on my personal computer. I don't even have the titles, but one of my other ones, which I'm trying to be aware of like people's impatience with stuff, but I call it it's a little bit of a shoot off from this book that I read from Rob Lowe, but I call it the world according to Richard.
Nice. Nice.
A nice a nice heady title, right?
Sure.
But and it's also kind of based on a couple books I read from Lee Iacocca on leadership and stuff, where he covers different topics.
Sure.
So I want to cover some of the same topics like education, and but I want to cover a whole bunch of things like transportation, transit, gay rights, biking, travel, airlines, all sorts of different things that I've been involved with,
Nice.
but in kind of a short format to
Okay.
kind of tell an overall story that people can sort of get a flavor for and then move on to something different.
Nice.
So maybe like 20 or 30 topics in a book.
Awesome. There you
But
go.
I kind of like the title though.
Yeah. Nice. Uh, that sounds good. Yeah, like I said, update me with any links as they become available, and that way people that are watching the show, whatever, a year from now, can say, "Oh, here's the link. Let me check that out." So,
Perfect.
yeah,
Perfect. Thank you very much. You can be my first promoter.
sure, 100%.
Because I don't want to linger on here like in a year from now, and I don't want to be like Matthew and only have like 5,000 viewers.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go for the other side. I want the billion. No,
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you again so much, Richard. Really appreciate
great
it.
talking to you. Yeah,
Great,
this
great talking to you too.
kind of warmed me up to the podcast world. So
Sure. All right, you be a natural. You'll do fine. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Richard.
thanks, man. I haven't been
Yeah.
interviewed for a long time, so
Yeah. Nice. All right. I'll
make
see
sure
you
you spell
later.
my name right. Right.
Yes, I got it. I got it. Yep. Okay.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Spencer.
Yeah.
Great talking to you.